What's the craziest crime you or somebody in your family has committed? My friend got blackout drunk and stole a bulldozer that had the keys left in it. He turned it on and obviously didn't know how to drive it, so he just ended up making the scoopy part go up and down for a bit before the cops came. They actually let him go too. My dad's older brother came home from the war in Vietnam to find that his wife had been cheating on him with his best friend. He locked them both in the friend's house and burned it down with them in it. He held the firefighters off with a rifle until he was sure they couldn't be saved. Then he shot himself. This was before I was born, but I've seen some newspaper clippings about it. My dad brought in a banana tree to the US from his home village in Kerala. He literally walked through customs with a tree and a pot in his arms. The customs lady asked him what he was thinking and he just replied that the banana tree was from his mother's garden. The customs lady must have thought my dad was crazy, but she just let him walk right through. We still have that tree and its offspring. My grandfather's cousin stabbed a waiter to death because he wouldn't let him use the employees only restroom in his restaurant. Is your grandfather's cousin Jack Henry Abbott? Yes. Have you read his book about life in prison? It's an experience. A distant cousin got her terminally ill father to give her power of attorney and then stole all of his money so she wouldn't have to split it with her brother. Edit. Don't worry. She did go to jail as her rush to clean him out involved a lot of fraud and forgery. Edit 2. Man. It is slightly depressing how many of you have similar stories. What's up with people? A guy I went to school with in the 70s emptied his dementia-ridden father's life savings while he lived with him. 60 some years old, and still stealing to support his coke habit. His sister found out, and he did 5 years. Restitution, $80K. No way he'll live long enough to pay that back. And 8 years probation. Something similar happened to my uncle, except he wasn't terminally ill. He was working in China and his longtime partner was trying to poison him. In food pills she sent him. Meanwhile at home she got power of attorney and put him hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, buying expensive stuff, paying off her kids' debt etc. She went to the bank and got a friend to forge the power. He finally realized that he felt sick whenever he took the items she gave him and found out what she was doing. He came home and tried to get her arrested, but I don't think she ended up doing much time at all. He's still in huge debt from her and mainly lives in the Philippines. It's not a bad crime or anything, but it was illegal at the time. So, in Germany, up until a few years ago, we still had a general draft for the army, and a generation ago it was very hard to get out of it. My uncle was a hardcore pacifist, so going to the army wasn't an option for him. But being accepted as a conscientious objector at that time basically required you to be a devout Christian and use the Bible as an argument for why you couldn't kill another human. And my uncle was also atheist. He couldn't realistically object, didn't want to go to the army and didn't want to go to jail, too. So he waited. He got sent his draft notice, passed the physical and got a letter telling him to report to X company under Sergeant Y. He wrote back a reply, on rose-colored paper, scented with perfume, about how much he was looking forward to serving under the strong leadership of Y, promising to obey every one of his orders, and that he can't wait to experience life in the barracks together with so many strong and muscular men. He was declared unfit for service shortly after. Now this is the kind of rule breaking I live to hear about. Cheeky bastard. Haha. My grandfather was conscripted for WWII. Massive pacifist too. All it took in Australia is he told the Navy that he got his GF. My grandma, pregnant. Apparently that was one of the worst things you could do back then. They got married later on, but it was looked on so poorly back then they took his word for it as no one would lie about that. My dad, when he was much younger and infinitely more stupid, regularly used to drink drive with his friends. It was the early 70s, and no one really cared. To hear him speak about it now, he can't believe how stupid he was. One night, he and his friend were out drinking. They heard there was a party going on at a pub across town and decided to head over. On the way they go past a large club with a queue of people waiting to go in. My dad decides to show off a bit and pull a skid. He miscalculated, hit a curb and flipped the car, sliding down the road on his roof. The car stops. They get out and leg it. To the cheers of the people in the queue, they get the bus back home and immediately call the police to report the car as stolen. The police knew what had happened, but couldn't prove anything. Cousin got busted robbing a bank, got sentenced to jail, proceeded to break out of jail with his cellmate and went on the run. Fast forward a few months and he's living in a hotel room with his cellmate. Cellmate orders a pizza to the room. Bad idea. Delivery guy recognized them and reported them to the police. They get arrested again, and shortly after my cousin killed himself in prison. My cousin had a wife and a kid and got into a nasty coke habit. We don't bring him up anymore. I need to sleep soon. I read this too fast and Zor broke out of jail with his cellmate living in hotel room and pizza and thought you were just describing the plot to Home Alone 2. This was a couple of generations back, early 20th century, but there was this guy who was constantly getting drunk and harassing my great aunt. So, one of her male friends dressed up in an Easter bunny outfit, put a bat in its giant fake carrot and beat the dude with it. He got away with it, but I'm sure it helped that half the community was waiting for the day the guy's liver finally gave out. My grandfather's father was a mean, abusive, hateful drunk, who would come home from working in the mines long enough to terrorize his children and impregnate his wife and then leave again for mine work. He tried to set the house on fire, with wife and kids, 13 of them, inside twice. One day my grandfather and a couple of his siblings were picking berries across the road from the house and his drunk father started taking pot shots at them with a rifle. My grandpa, one brother, and his oldest sister took off running for the house with the agreement that the first one there would kill him. Their father, my grandpa's sister, got there first and shot him to death. She was never charged with a crime, due to her age and the fact that everyone knew my great-grandfather was a mean son of a bee and had it coming. My dad's side of the family grew up as New Hampshire hicks. My grandfather was stabbed in 2 different bar fights and burned down an entire country club because he thought they were too stuck up. He was never caught and went on to earn a Bronze and Silver Star in the Korean War, but unfortunately lost his leg too. I worked at a movie theater when Back to the Future was originally released. We used to take the entire movie ticket instead of tearing them and resell them to the next group coming in. The old theater was massive, sat 600 people. We probably made about $15k between 2 of us in month or so, adjusted for inflation. It's about $37k. We were the richest high school kids in our town. An uncle robbed a bank, or was an accessory to the robbers, IDK. His brilliant escape when the police showed up was to go to the roof and jump off. He didn't do time, just had to go to the hospital for a broken leg. I'll have to ask my mom when I get a chance. She knows the story better than I do. My uncle went to prison for chaining a cop to the back of his bike and driving down the highway. Edit. I feel like an edit is needed here because I want to say I am not glorifying what my uncle did. I simply answered the question asked. This happened in the 1960s before I was born, so I do not have many details due to the timing. In fact, he married into the family, and that side of my family is not very close at all. What I do know is my uncle was a part of a very violent gang. I know nothing about what led to the attempted murder. Yes, the cop survived somehow, so I do not know if the cop was good or bad, but I do not believe very many people, if any, deserve to be tortured in such a manner, or any manner. When I was a young teen, the boys from the neighborhood and I loved playing pinball and video games at our local bowling alley. Problem was we didn't have enough money to enjoy our new addiction. We decided to do something about that little problem. We started with a very rudimentary system. We actually scotch taped a piece of thread to a quarter and were able to fish it up and down a couple times before the string would break, or the tape would give out. This worked fairly well, but we wanted and needed more. Our next plan was a little more professional. We somehow concocted a scheme to make quarters. A few lessons in science class had actually stuck, and we realized that we needed something to fool the coin mechanism in the pinball machine into thinking that whatever it was we made our quarters with was an actual quarter. We ended up deciding that lead would be our material of choice. We used lead for a couple of reasons. A couple of the guy's father was an avid hunter. He even reloaded his own shotgun shells. Because of this, he had a burner set up in his shop to melt down lead. Another reason is that lead is not magnetic. Science. We made a mold out of plaster and used the burner to melt lead to make our quarters. But where to get more lead? One of us came up with the brilliant thought that tire weights were made of lead. Carrying screwdrivers and pliers, we scoured the parking lots of shopping centers. We would wander through and drop down out of sight between cars. Using the tools we had brought, we would manage to get the tire weights off with little trouble. We were in business. Our production line was soon up and running. We would melt lead, pour it into our mold, cool it and then move on to finishing our new quarter. The finishing process was crude, but effective. We would snip off the burr where the lead was poured. We would then file down the edge, making sure it stayed mostly round. Using steel wool and a polishing cloth we would then shine the quarters. Now came the trial run. We went to the bowling alley with a few quarters to see if our harebrained scheme would actually work. In they went, and the pinball machine lit up and was ready to be played. Success. We intensified our production and soon we had bunches of quarters. We were thrilled. We could play video games anytime we wanted. Every day after school you'd find us at the bowling alley, happily playing our games. But our downfall was soon to come. We never thought of the fact that someone might notice a bunch of fake quarters being used in their video games and pinball machines. It literally never crossed our early teenage minds. We just knew we were having a blast. One fateful day we went to the bowling alley as usual. We started playing games and soon some men approached us. They started questioning us and accusing us. We were scared to death. One of the guys yelled "Run!" and we took off as fast as we could. We made it to the doors and down the steps we went. We all lived on the same cul-de-sac and that's the direction we headed. Running as fast as we could, we briefly split up. The men that were chasing us only followed one of us kids. He made the colossal mistake of running straight to his house and through the front door. From there our crime spree ended. A few days later I was in class when I was called to the office. When I got there my father was sitting with a man I'd never seen before. He was wearing a black suit with a black tie. I had to go before the principal, my father and a member of the United States Secret Service. Although they take the counterfeiting of US currency very seriously, they understood that it was just a bunch of knucklehead kids making quarters to play video games. He actually told me that he was impressed with the quality of the quarters. He also said that they had recovered over $75 in fake quarters. We had made and used over 300 quarters. We had to make restitution for the money and the charge was placed on our juvenile records. It was explained to us that if we kept our noses clean the charge would be expunged. Luckily for me I learned my lesson and stayed on the straight and narrow for the rest of my young adult life. And that, fellow redditors, is how I was charged with counterfeiting as currency. If that doesn't define the meaning of a crazy crime, I don't know what would.